The sound of glass shattering against the wall behind her head made Felicity Morgan duck instinctively. Whiskey dripping down the faded floral wallpaper as the drunk miner stumbled toward the bar demanding another bottle. She straightened her crimson dress, painted a smile across her tired face, and reminded herself that this was the last place she wanted to die. Yet here she was at 23 years old, serving drinks and dodging advances in the Golden Spur Saloon in Veta, Colorado, in the summer of 1878. The mountain town had grown rapidly with the discovery of silver in the surrounding peaks, bringing fortune seekers, gamblers, and men who saw women like her as temporary entertainment rather than human beings with dreams and aspirations. Felicity had arrived 2 years earlier after her father's death left her orphaned and penniless in Kansas City. The journey west had been born of desperation, and the only work available for a young woman without family or prospects had been in establishments like this one. She carried a tray of drinks to a table where 4 men played poker, their eyes lingering on her in ways that made her skin crawl. She had become expert at deflecting their comments with practiced laughter that never reached her eyes, at keeping just enough distance to avoid their grasping hands without offending them enough to complain to her employer. The owner of the Golden Spur, a heavyset man named Marcus Brennan, cared only about profit, and a girl who did not keep the customers happy would find herself out on the street with nowhere to go. "Another round, boys?" Felicity asked, her voice bright despite the exhaustion settling into her bones. One of the men, a regular named Pete who always smelled of tobacco and stale beer, grabbed her wrist. "How about you sit with us a spell, sweetheart? Bring us some luck." She gently extracted herself with the skill of long practice. "I would love to, but Mr. Brennan needs me at the bar." "Maybe later." There would be no later. There never was. She would find ways to stay busy until they forgot or moved on to someone else. As she returned to the bar, the saloon doors swung open, and a man walked in who immediately caught her attention, though she could not say exactly why. He was tall, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. Unlike most of the men who frequented the Golden Spur, he did not swagger or shout. He simply walked to the bar with a quiet confidence, dust from the trail coating his boots and the worn leather of his vest. "Whiskey," he said to the bartender, his voice low and measured. "And information if you have got it." "Information costs extra," the bartender replied, pouring a generous measure into a glass. The stranger laid a silver dollar on the bar. "I am looking for work. Ranch work, cattle driving, breaking horses. Anything honest." Felicity found herself moving closer, pretending to wipe down the bar while she listened. Men looking for honest work were rare in Veta these days. Most came seeking quick riches in the mines or at the card tables. The bartender pocketed the coin. "Try the Dawson spread, about 10 miles north of town. Heard they were looking for hands. Owner's name is Thomas Dalton, runs cattle up in the high country." The stranger nodded his thanks and downed the whiskey in one smooth motion. As he turned to leave, his eyes met Felicity's for just a moment, and she saw something there she had not seen in a long time. Simple acknowledgement of her as a person rather than an object. No leering, no calculation, just a brief nod of courtesy before he headed back toward the doors. "Wait," she heard herself say, surprising even herself. He paused, turning back with a questioning look. "The Dawson Ranch," she continued, her heart beating faster at her own boldness. "The foreman's name is Jack Sterling. He is a fair man, but he does not suffer laziness or drinking. If you mention that Felicity Morgan sent you, he will at least hear you out. His wife buys her dresses from the seamstress next to the general store, and I helped her carry packages once when she was in town." She remembered the kindness. The stranger studied her for a long moment, and she saw a flicker of curiosity in his expression. "That is generous of you. I am grateful. What is your name?" she asked, knowing she was overstepping the unspoken boundaries of her position. Thomas Dalton." He touched the brim of his hat. "I hope to repay your kindness someday, Miss Morgan." Then he was gone, and Felicity stood there with a strange flutter in her chest that she had not felt in years. She tried to push it away, to focus on her work, but throughout the long evening, as she served drinks and avoided hands and smiled until her face ached, she kept thinking about those storm-gray eyes and the respectful way he had spoken to her. 3 days passed before she saw Thomas Dalton again. She had just finished her shift at the saloon, stepping out into the early morning sunlight that made her blink after the dim interior. Veta was already bustling with activity. Miners heading toward the hills, wagons rattling down the main street, women with baskets heading to the general store. "Miss Morgan." She turned to find Thomas Dalton standing a respectful distance away, his hat in his hands. He looked cleaner than he had in the saloon, his face freshly shaved, though his clothes were still those of a working cowboy. "Mr. Dalton," she replied, surprise evident in her voice. "I wanted to thank you properly," he said. "Your advice was sound. Mr. Sterling hired me on the spot when I mentioned your name. I start tomorrow, and they are providing a bunk in the ranch house. It is the first real piece of luck I have had in months." Felicity felt warmth spread through her chest. "I am glad it worked out. You did not have to come all the way back to town to tell me, but I appreciate it." "Actually," Thomas said, and she noticed a hint of nervousness in his posture, "I was wondering if you might allow me to buy you breakfast. There is a restaurant down the street, a proper place. I noticed you finishing your shift, and I thought you might be hungry." She should have said no. Saloon girls did not have breakfast with cowboys in proper restaurants. People would talk, would assume things, would judge. But something in his earnest expression, in the genuine kindness she saw there, made her reckless. "I would like that very much," she said softly. They walked to the restaurant, maintaining a careful distance between them that spoke of propriety. The owner, Mrs. Chen, a Chinese woman who had come west with her husband to cook for the railroad crews and stayed to open her own establishment, greeted them with warmth and showed them to a table by the window. Thomas ordered eggs, bacon, and fresh bread, insisting Felicity get whatever she wanted. She asked for the same, suddenly ravenous. When had she last eaten a real meal? She usually survived on scraps from the saloon kitchen, eaten standing up between shifts. "You did not have to do this," she said as Mrs. Chen poured them coffee. "I wanted to," Thomas replied. "You helped me when you had no reason to, and I am grateful." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "If you do not mind me asking, how does a woman like you end up working in a place like the Golden Spur?" Most men ask that question with judgment dripping from every word. Thomas asked it with simple curiosity, as though he genuinely wanted to understand. Felicity wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup. "My father died 2 years ago. We lived in Kansas City. He was a school teacher and I helped him. When he passed, I had no family, no money, and no prospects. A woman alone has limited options. I came west hoping to find work as a teacher or a seamstress, but Veta already had both. The saloon was hiring. I told myself it would be temporary, just until I saved enough money to move on somewhere else. But you are still here," Thomas observed gently. "But I am still here," she echoed. "Mr. Brennan pays barely enough to cover my room at the boarding house and food. There is never anything left to save. And every day I stay, it becomes harder to imagine leaving, harder to imagine anyone seeing me as anything other than a saloon girl. She had not meant to be so honest, to reveal so much vulnerability to a virtual stranger. But something about Thomas Dalton invited confidence. Their food arrived, and they ate in comfortable silence for a few moments before Thomas spoke again. "I do not see you as just a saloon girl. I see a woman who showed kindness to a stranger, who works hard in difficult circumstances, who has survived things that would have broken weaker people. The past does not have to define who you are or who you can become." Felicity looked up sharply, tears pricking unexpectedly at her eyes. "That is a beautiful sentiment, Mr. Dalton, but the world does not share your generous view. Where I have worked, what I have done, even if it was born of necessity, that is what people will always see." "Then maybe you need to be around different people," Thomas said quietly. "People who judge character rather than circumstance." They talked for another hour, the restaurant filling and emptying around them as morning turned to midday. Thomas told her about growing up on a ranch in Texas, about losing his family to fever when he was 19, about spending the past several years drifting from job to job, never quite finding a place that felt like home. His honesty matched her own, and Felicity found herself relaxing in a way she had not relaxed in years. When they finally parted ways, Thomas on his way back to the Dawson Ranch, and Felicity heading to her boarding house for a few hours of sleep before her next shift, something had shifted between them. A connection had formed, fragile but real, and Felicity carried it with her like a secret treasure. Over the following weeks, Thomas made a habit of coming to town on his days off. He always found Felicity, always treated her with the same quiet respect, and slowly, carefully, a courtship began. They took walks along the creek that ran through Veta, talking about everything and nothing. He brought her wildflowers from the high meadows, and she mended a tear in his favorite shirt. It was innocent and sweet and completely improper by the standards of the time. A cowboy courting a saloon girl as though she were a respectable young woman. Marcus Brennan noticed, of course. He cornered Felicity one evening before her shift, his bulk blocking her path to the main room. "I hear you have been keeping company with one of the Dawson Ranch hands," he said, his voice deceptively mild. Felicity kept her expression neutral. "Mr. Dalton and I are friends. He has been kind to me." "Kind?" Brennan laughed, the sound without humor. "Men are not kind to girls like you without expecting something in return, and if he thinks he can take you away from my saloon, he is mistaken. You have a contract, Felicity. You work here until I say otherwise." Her blood ran cold. The contract, such as it was, amounted to indentured servitude. Brennan had paid her first month's rent at the boarding house when she arrived, and the agreement stated she would work off that debt plus interest. The way he calculated her wages versus her supposed costs, she would never be free of the obligation. "I understand," she said quietly, knowing that arguing would only make things worse. "Good. Now get out there and smile pretty for the customers. And tell your cowboy friend that if he wants your company, he can pay for it like everyone else." Felicity felt sick as she moved into the main room, but she painted on her professional smile and went through the motions of her work. When Thomas appeared 3 days later, waiting for her outside the saloon at the end of her shift, she knew she had to tell him the truth about her situation. They walked to their usual spot by the creek, the late September air carrying the first hints of the coming autumn. Felicity wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and tried to find the words. "Thomas, I need to tell you something about my arrangement with Mr. Brennan." She explained the contract, the impossible debt, the way Brennan manipulated the numbers to keep her trapped. Thomas listened in silence, his jaw tightening with anger. "That is not legal," he said finally. It cannot be. Legal or not, Brennan has connections in this town. The sheriff looks the other way. I have nowhere to go, no money to fight him. This is my reality. Thomas turned to face her, taking her hands in his. It was the first time he had touched her beyond a polite offering of his arm, and the contact sent warmth racing through her. What if it did not have to be? He asked. What if there was another way? What do you mean? Marry me, Thomas said simply. Marry me, and you will no longer be alone with no one to stand up for you. Marry me, and I will deal with Brennan. Marry me, and we will build a life together, away from the Golden Spur and away from your past. Felicity stared at him, certain she had misheard. You cannot be serious. Thomas, we have known each other for barely 2 months. And I am what I am. I have worked in a saloon, served drinks to drunk men, been pawed at and propositioned. You deserve better than that. I deserve someone who makes me want to be a better man, Thomas said, his storm gray eyes intense. I deserve someone brave and strong and kind. I deserve you, Felicity, if you will have me. And your past does not define our future. I believe that with everything in me. What you had to do to survive does not change who you are inside. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she gripped his hands tighter. People will talk. They will say terrible things about why you married me. Let them talk. I know the truth, and so do you. That is all that matters. He reached up to gently wipe away her tears with his thumb. I love you, Felicity Morgan. I think I have loved you since the moment you went out of your way to help a dusty stranger in a saloon. Say yes. Please say yes. She should have been cautious, should have questioned his motives or worried about practical matters. But standing there in the fading light with this good, honest man offering her not just escape but genuine love and respect, Felicity let her heart make the decision. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you. Thomas pulled her into his arms, and they held each other as the creek burbled past and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Felicity felt as though she were waking from a long, dark dream into something bright and full of possibility. The practical arrangements happened quickly. Thomas spoke to Jack Sterling, who in turn spoke to Thomas Dawson, the ranch owner. Dawson, a gruff but fair man in his 50s, agreed to let Thomas build a small cabin on ranch land for his new bride. The other ranch hands, good men who had come to respect Thomas in his months working alongside them, offered to help with the construction. The bigger problem was Marcus Brennan. Thomas insisted on confronting him directly, and though Felicity feared violence, she trusted Thomas to handle it properly. They went together to the Golden Spur on a quiet afternoon before the evening rush. Brennan was in his office, counting the previous night's receipts. He looked up with annoyance when they entered, his expression darkening when he saw Thomas. You are not welcome here, Dalton, Brennan said. And Felicity, you should be upstairs resting before your shift. Felicity will not be working any more shifts, Thomas said calmly. She is leaving your employment. Brennan laughed, the sound ugly. Is that so? Did she tell you about our contract? She owes me another 18 months of work by my calculation. I have seen your contract, Thomas replied, pulling a folded paper from his vest pocket. I showed it to a lawyer in Pueblo. He confirmed what I suspected. Debt bondage is illegal in Colorado. Has been since statehood in 1876. Your contract is not worth the paper it is written on. The color drained from Brennan's face before flooding back in an angry red. That lawyer does not know what he is talking about. I have invested in this girl, provided her with employment and lodging. You have exploited a desperate young woman and called it business, Thomas said, his voice hardening. Felicity is leaving. Today. If you attempt to stop her or retaliate in any way, I will make sure every detail of your illegal contracts and business practices becomes public knowledge. I imagine the territorial authorities would be very interested in how you have been treating your employees." Brennan stood, his bulk menacing, but Thomas did not flinch. For a long moment the two men stared at each other, wills clashing in the dusty office. Finally, Brennan waved a dismissive hand. "Fine, take her. She was never worth the trouble anyway. But do not come crying to me when you realize what you have married, Dalton. A saloon girl is a saloon girl, no matter what fancy words you dress it up with." Felicity flinched at the words, but Thomas moved to her side, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. "You are wrong, Brennan. But I do not expect a man like you to understand that. Come on, Felicity. Let us go." They left the Golden Spur together, Felicity stopping only to collect her few belongings from the boarding house. Everything she owned fit in a single carpet bag. It was a meager start, but as Thomas loaded it into the wagon he had borrowed from the ranch, Felicity felt lighter than she had in years. The weight of Brennan's hold on her was gone, and ahead lay possibility. They were married 3 days later by a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through Veta. The ceremony took place at the Dawson Ranch, with Jack Sterling and his wife Martha standing as witnesses. It was simple and quick, but when Thomas slipped a thin gold band onto Felicity's finger and kissed her for the first time, she felt the significance of the moment settle into her bones. She was no longer alone. She was no longer trapped. She was Felicity Dalton, beloved wife of a good man who saw value in her that she had almost forgotten she possessed. The cabin Thomas and the other ranch hands built was small but sturdy, with one main room that served as kitchen and living space, a bedroom barely large enough for a bed and washstand, and a loft for storage. To Felicity, who had spent 2 years in a cramped room above a saloon, it was a palace. She spent her first weeks as a married woman making it into a home, sewing curtains from fabric Martha Sterling helped her purchase, arranging the simple furniture Thomas built, learning to cook proper meals over the fireplace. Thomas worked long days at the ranch, often leaving before dawn and returning after sunset, but he always greeted her with genuine joy, as though seeing her was the best part of his day. They would sit together after dinner, talking or simply existing in comfortable silence, and Felicity marveled at the peace of it, the utter contentment of being with someone who loved her without condition or expectation of anything beyond her presence. Their first months together were not without challenges. Felicity struggled with the practical tasks of running a household, having never been taught such things. Her father had been a scholar, more interested in books than domestic arrangements, and their home had always been somewhat chaotic. Bread burned, stews turned out too salty, and she ruined an entire basket of laundry by using the wrong soap. Thomas never complained or criticized. Instead, he helped where he could, shared the disasters with good humor, and assured her that they would figure it out together. The harder challenge was the whispers that followed her whenever they went into Veta together. People recognized her from the Golden Spur, and not everyone shared Thomas's generous perspective on her past. Women pulled their children away when she passed, as though her presence might contaminate them. Men looked at her with knowing smirks, making crude assumptions about her relationship with Thomas. She tried to ignore it, tried to hold her head high as Thomas advised, but some days the judgment felt suffocating. One particularly difficult afternoon in late November, Felicity was at the general store purchasing supplies when she overheard 2 women talking in the next aisle. "I cannot believe Thomas Dalton married that woman from the saloon," one said, her voice dripping with disdain. "What was he thinking? Everyone knows what kind of girl works in those places." "I heard she trapped him somehow," the other replied. "Probably told him she was expecting a child or some such lie. Poor man will regret it soon enough when he realizes what he has brought into his home." Felicity stood frozen, her face burning with shame and anger. She wanted to confront them, to defend herself, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she abandoned her partially filled basket and fled the store, tears blurring her vision as she hurried toward the wagon where Thomas was loading feed sacks. He took one look at her face and immediately abandoned what he was doing, guiding her to a quiet spot behind the feed store where they could have privacy. "What happened?" he asked, his voice gentle but his eyes flashing with anger. "Did someone hurt you?" Through tears, Felicity told him what she had overheard. Thomas listened, his jaw tightening, and when she finished, he pulled her into his arms. "Those women are small-minded fools," he said fiercely. "Their opinions mean nothing. You are my wife, and I am proud to have you at my side. I love you, Felicity, not despite your past, but because of everything you have survived and overcome. You are the strongest person I know." "But what if they are right?" Felicity whispered against his chest. "What if you do regret marrying me? What if I can never be the respectable wife you deserve?" Thomas pulled back just enough to cup her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Listen to me carefully. I have never been more certain of anything in my life than I am of my love for you. You are kind, brave, intelligent, and beautiful. You make me laugh. You make me want to build a future worth living. Nothing anyone says can change those facts. Your past does not define our future, remember? We make our own future together, starting from right now." His absolute certainty, the unwavering love in his eyes, soothed the raw places in Felicity's heart. She took a shuddering breath and nodded, allowing herself to believe him, to trust in the solid reality of their relationship rather than the poisonous whispers of strangers. Winter came to the high country with brutal swiftness. Snow piled against the cabin walls, and temperatures dropped until the water in their wash basin froze overnight. Thomas taught Felicity how to bank the fire properly to keep them warm through the long nights, and they spent evenings huddled together under quilts, reading aloud from the few books they owned, or simply talking about their hopes for the future. It was during one of those quiet evenings in early December that Felicity first voiced the dream that had been growing in her heart. "Thomas, what if we started a school?" He looked up from the harness he was mending, surprise evident on his face. "A school. La Veta has children, but the nearest school is in Pueblo, too far for most families to send them. My father taught me well. I could teach reading, writing, arithmetic, history. We could use the cabin, at least to start. It would not be much, but it would be something." Thomas set aside the harness, his expression thoughtful. "It is a wonderful idea, but are you sure you want to put yourself in that position? You know how some people in town feel about you. They might not want you teaching their children." "I know," Felicity admitted, "but I have to try. I have to prove, not to them but to myself, that I am more than what they think, that I can contribute something meaningful to this community. Teaching is what I was meant to do. It is what I would have done if circumstances had not taken me down a different path." Thomas reached over and took her hand. "Then we will do it. If this is what you want, I will support you completely. We can speak to Mr. Dawson and Jack Sterling. Maybe some of the ranch families would be interested. Once a few people give you a chance, others will follow." Hope surged in Felicity's chest. "You really think so?" "I know so. You are an excellent teacher. I have seen it in the way you explain things to me, the patience you have, the way you make complicated ideas simple. You have a gift, Felicity. It would be a shame to waste it." They spent the rest of the evening planning, excitement building as they discussed practical details. They would need slates, chalk, primers, and basic supplies. They would have to clear space in the cabin for students to sit. They would need to convince parents to give Felicity a chance despite her past. True to his word, Thomas spoke to Thomas Dawson the next day. The ranch owner listened to their proposal, and after some consideration, agreed to spread word among the ranch families. He had 3 grandchildren of school age living with his daughter on the property, and he offered them as Felicity's first students if she was willing. "My daughter Helen is a fair woman," Dawson said. "She will judge you on your teaching, not your history. If you do right by her children, she will tell others." It was the opening they needed. Felicity threw herself into preparation, using some of their carefully saved money to purchase basic supplies. Martha Sterling donated several old primers her own children had outgrown, and the circuit preacher, when he passed through again in January, contributed a well-worn Bible and a book of American history. The school opened in February of 1879 with 4 students, Dawson's 3 grandchildren and the son of one of the other ranch hands. Felicity was terrified that first morning, certain she would somehow fail or that the children's parents would change their minds. But as she began the lessons, falling into the familiar rhythms her father had taught her, confidence took over. She knew this. She was good at this. The children responded well to her patient explanations and genuine interest in their learning. By the end of the first week, Helen Dawson stopped by the cabin to thank Felicity personally. "My children are already showing improvement," Helen said, her manner warm. "Emma can write her full name now, which she could not do before, and the boys are excited about the history lessons. Whatever people may say about you, Miss Dalton, you are clearly a natural teacher." "Mrs. Dalton," Felicity corrected gently. "And thank you. Your children are wonderful students," Helen smiled. "Mrs. Dalton, of course, I apologize. And I wanted you to know I will be recommending your school to others. You have earned it." Word spread slowly but surely. By March, Felicity had 8 students. By April, 12. Some parents remained resistant, unwilling to entrust their children to a former saloon girl, but enough gave her a chance that the school became self-sustaining. Felicity charged a small fee, whatever families could afford, and it provided a modest income that helped her and Thomas save toward their own future. Spring brought new life to the high country. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows, and the creeks swelled with snowmelt. Felicity's garden, planted with Martha Sterling's advice, began to sprout, promising fresh vegetables for the summer. And in late April, Felicity realized she had missed her monthly courses for the second time. She waited another week to be certain before telling Thomas. They had been intimate as husband and wife since their wedding night, their physical relationship growing in tenderness and passion as they grew more comfortable with each other. The possibility of a child had always been present, but now faced with the likely reality, Felicity felt a mixture of joy and terror. She chose a Sunday evening to tell him, after they had returned from having dinner with the Sterlings. They were sitting outside their cabin, watching the sun set behind the mountain peaks, when she took his hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. "Thomas, I think I am going to have a baby." His reaction was everything she could have hoped for. Shock gave way to wonder, then to pure joy as he pulled her into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. "A baby," he kept repeating. "We are going to have a baby. Felicity, this is everything." "You are happy?" she asked, though his reaction made the question unnecessary. "Happy does not begin to cover it. You have given me so much already. A home, a purpose, a reason to build a future. And now a child, our child. I am the luckiest man alive." They held each other as twilight deepened into night, talking about names and possibilities, and all the ways their lives were about to change. Felicity felt her earlier fears settling into excited anticipation. This child would be born into love, into a stable home with parents who wanted him or her desperately. This child would have the childhood Felicity herself had lost too soon, full of security and possibility. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and summer. Felicity continued teaching through May. But as the heat of June and July made the cabin stifling and her energy waned, she reluctantly closed the school for the summer with promises to reopen in September. The students had made remarkable progress, and even some of the initially skeptical parents had come around, acknowledging that whatever Felicity's past, she was a gifted educator. Martha Sterling became Felicity's primary source of advice and support as her body changed and grew. The older woman had raised 4 children of her own and shared her wisdom generously, alleviating Felicity's anxieties about childbirth and motherhood. Thomas hovered like a protective shadow, taking on extra work around their cabin so Felicity could rest, bringing her treats from town, reading to her in the evenings from a book of poetry he had purchased as a surprise. In late August, on a sweltering afternoon when Felicity was convinced she could not possibly grow any larger, her labor began. Martha Sterling and Helen Dawson attended her, their experienced hands and calm voices guiding her through the long, painful hours. Thomas waited outside, pacing and worrying until finally, as the sun was setting in brilliant shades of orange and pink, a baby's cry split the air. "It is a boy," Martha announced, bringing the squalling, red-faced infant to Felicity. "A healthy, strong boy." Felicity cradled her son, tears streaming down her face as she examined his tiny fingers, his shock of dark hair so like Thomas's, his perfect little face. When Thomas was finally allowed in, he approached almost reverently, staring at his son with awe. "He is perfect," Thomas whispered, gently touching the baby's cheek. "Felicity, you are amazing. Look at what you did. Look at our son." They named him Samuel after Felicity's father. Samuel Thomas Dalton, born August 29, 1879, to parents who loved him more than anything in the world. The next months passed in a blur of sleepless nights and new parent exhaustion, but also profound joy. Samuel was a good baby, healthy and alert, and watching Thomas with him filled Felicity's heart to overflowing. Her husband was a natural father, patient with the baby's crying, eager to help with feedings and changings, spending every free moment simply holding his son and marveling at his existence. Felicity reopened her school in October, bringing Samuel with her and setting up a cradle in the corner of the cabin where he slept or played while she taught. The children loved having a baby present, and the parents appreciated Felicity's determination to continue their children's education despite her new responsibilities. Life settled into a rhythm that felt almost miraculous to Felicity when she stopped to think about it. 2 years earlier, she had been trapped in a saloon, seeing no future beyond the next shift the next day. Now she was a wife, a mother, a teacher, and a respected member of a small but growing community. Thomas had been right. Her past had not defined their future. They had built something new together, something beautiful and lasting. But the past has a way of returning when you least expect it. On a cold November morning, Felicity was in the general store purchasing supplies when she heard a familiar voice that made her blood run cold. Well, if it is not little Felicity Morgan, or should I say Dalton now? She turned to find Marcus Brennan standing behind her, his bulk blocking the narrow aisle. He looked older, more haggard, but his eyes held the same calculating gleam she remembered. "Mr. Brennan," she said, keeping her voice level despite her racing heart. "What are you doing here? I still own the Golden Spur last I checked. I am here picking up a shipment of whiskey. But I am glad I ran into you. Heard you have been playing school teacher, that you even have a baby now. Quite the respectable life you have built," I am not playing at anything, Felicity said firmly. Now, if you will excuse me, I need to finish my shopping. She tried to move past him, but Brennan shifted to keep her trapped. Not so fast. See, I have been thinking. You cost me money when you left, Felicity. I had to replace you, train someone new. It seems only fair that you should compensate me for my losses. You have no claim on me, Felicity said, anger rising. Thomas made that clear when I left. Your contracts were illegal. Oh, I do not want you back, Brennan said, his smile unpleasant. I want money. Let us call it $500. That seems fair for the trouble you caused. If you do not pay, well, I would hate for all your respectable neighbors to hear detailed stories about your time at the saloon. I kept very thorough records, you see. Records of who you served drinks to, who propositioned you, the atmosphere you worked in. Imagine what the parents of your students would think. Felicity felt sick. That is blackmail. That is business. You have 1 week to get me the money. If you do not, everyone in Veta will know every sordid detail of your past, true or exaggerated. I will make sure of it. He pushed past her and left the store, leaving Felicity shaking with rage and fear. She finished her purchases mechanically, her mind racing. $500 was a fortune, far more than she and Thomas had saved. Even if they could raise it, paying Brennan would drain them completely and set a precedent. He would come back for more, again and again. But if they did not pay, he would destroy the life she had built. Parents would pull their children from her school. The community that had slowly begun to accept her would turn against her. All the progress she had made, all the respect she had earned would be gone. She had to tell Thomas, but the thought of burdening him with this filled her with guilt. He had already saved her once from Brennan. It was not fair that he should have to do it again. When she returned home, Thomas took one look at her face and knew something was wrong. While Samuel napped, Felicity told him everything. She watched Thomas's expression darken with anger as she spoke, his hands clenching into fists. That snake, Thomas said when she finished. He cannot get away with this. But what can we do? Felicity asked desperately. We do not have that kind of money, and even if we did, paying him just invites him back for more. But if we do not pay, he will ruin everything. My school, my reputation, all of it. Thomas pulled her close, and she felt the tension in his body as he struggled with his own anger. We are not paying him a cent, and he is not going to ruin anything. Let me think. There has to be a way to stop him. Over the next 2 days, Thomas consulted quietly with Jack Sterling and Thomas Dawson. The 3 men put their heads together, and what they discovered gave them ammunition to fight back. Brennan's business practices at the Golden Spur had made him enemies. His illegal contracts, his watering down of whiskey, his rigged gambling tables, all of it added up to a pattern of criminal behavior that extended far beyond his treatment of Felicity. On the 5th day after Brennan's threat, Thomas and Jack Sterling rode into Veta and went directly to the sheriff's office. They brought with them signed statements from 3 former employees of the Golden Spur who were willing to testify about Brennan's illegal activities. They also brought the lawyer from Pueblo, who explained in detail how Brennan's contract practices violated territorial law. The sheriff, a straight-backed man named Bill Tucker, who had only recently taken office after the previous corrupt sheriff retired, listened with growing interest. He had been looking for a reason to shut down some of Brennan's more egregious operations, and this gave him the legal justification he needed. That afternoon, Sheriff Tucker paid a visit to Marcus Brennan at the Golden Spur. What exactly was said remained between them, but the result was clear. Brennan left Veta the next morning, selling the Golden Spur to a businessman from Denver who promised to run it more honestly. Before he left, He was made to understand in no uncertain terms that if he ever approached Felicity Dalton again, if he ever attempted to blackmail or harass her in any way, he would face criminal charges that would land him in territorial prison. Thomas returned home that evening and simply said, "It is over. Brennan is gone and he will not be coming back." Felicity collapsed against him in relief, tears flowing freely. "How did you do it?" "I had help," Thomas admitted. "Mr. Dawson, Jack Sterling, the sheriff. Turns out you have more friends in this community than you realized. People see the good you do with your school, the way you have conducted yourself with dignity and grace. Brennan does not have that kind of support. He never did." "I cannot believe it is really over," Felicity whispered. "Believe it. Your past is truly in the past now. No one can use it to hurt you anymore." As Thomas held her, Felicity felt a weight she had been carrying for years finally lift. Brennan had represented more than just a personal threat. He had been a symbol of her past, of the shame and fear she had lived with. With him gone, she could finally move forward without looking over her shoulder. Winter came again, their second as a married couple. Samuel grew and thrived, becoming a bright, curious baby who laughed often and reached for his parents with chubby hands. The school continued to flourish, with enrollment growing to 16 students by the start of 1880. Felicity's reputation as a talented teacher spread beyond La Veta, and she began receiving inquiries from families in neighboring areas about starting satellite schools or training other teachers. In March, Thomas came home with unexpected news. Thomas Dawson was selling him 20 acres of good grazing land at a fair price, with the option to purchase more as Thomas could afford it. It was an opportunity to start building their own ranch, to create something that would belong to them and their children. "It will take years to build up a proper herd," Thomas explained, his excitement palpable. "But Mr. Dawson is willing to let me continue working for wages while I get started, and he will sell me some starter cattle. With your income from the school and my wages, we can make it work. Felicity, we can build something real here, something that will be ours." Felicity saw the dream in his eyes and felt it echo in her own heart. "Then let us do it. Let us build our ranch, our future." The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. Thomas worked himself to exhaustion building fences, caring for their growing herd, and constructing a larger house to replace their tiny cabin. Felicity balanced teaching with raising Samuel, and beginning in 1881, his baby sister Grace. The new house had a proper room for the school, allowing Felicity to expand her enrollment to 25 students. La Veta grew around them, transforming from a rough mining town into a more settled community. Churches were built, more businesses opened, and respectability became more common than lawlessness. Through it all, Thomas and Felicity built their reputation as solid, trustworthy members of the community. The whispers about Felicity's past never entirely disappeared, but they became less frequent, less malicious, drowned out by the evidence of her character and contributions. By 1885, the Dalton Ranch covered 150 acres and supported a herd of 200 cattle. Thomas had hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, young men from town who treated Felicity with respect and played with Samuel and Grace during their breaks. The school had moved into a proper building in town, funded by the territorial government with strong endorsements from the families Felicity had been teaching for years. She supervised 3 other teachers now, having trained them herself, and served on the board of the newly formed school district. On a warm June evening, as they sat on the porch of their home watching Samuel, now almost 6, teaching Grace to skip rocks in the creek while their new baby, Thomas Jr., slept in Felicity's arms, Thomas turned to his wife with a contented smile. "You remember when we met?" he asked. "When you were brave enough to help a dusty stranger in a saloon," Felicity laughed softly. "I remember thinking you looked different from the other men, like you saw the world differently." "I saw you differently," Thomas said. "I saw past the circumstances to the person underneath. And I thank God every day that I did, because my life started the moment I met you." "Our lives started," Felicity corrected, leaning her head against his shoulder. "We built this together, Thomas. You believed in me when I did not believe in myself. You taught me that the past does not have to define the future, that we have the power to create our own story." "And what a story it has been," Thomas murmured, wrapping his arm around her and the baby. "What a story it continues to be." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Felicity reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From desperation and shame to love and respect, from a trapped saloon girl to a respected teacher and mother, from loneliness to a family that filled her heart to overflowing. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and challenge. Samuel grew into a thoughtful, intelligent boy who loved both books and ranch work. Grace was spirited and bold, unafraid of anything. Thomas Jr. was quiet and observant, taking in the world with serious eyes. In 1888, their youngest daughter, Catherine, arrived, completing their family. The school district expanded to serve 3 towns, and Felicity's influence shaped education policy across the region. She became known not just as a teacher, but as an advocate for children's education, arguing passionately that every child, regardless of their parents' financial situation or social standing, deserved access to quality schooling. It was a philosophy born from her own experiences, from knowing what it meant to have opportunities denied because of circumstances beyond one's control. The ranch prospered under Thomas's careful management. He never became one of the cattle barons with thousands of head, but he built something sustainable and profitable that provided well for his family and offered employment to others. His reputation for fairness and honesty made the Dalton Ranch a desirable place to work, and he took pride in training young cowboys and helping them start their own operations when they were ready. In 1892, when the territorial government considered new regulations for saloons and dance halls, Felicity was invited to testify about her experiences. It was the first time she had spoken publicly about her past in such detail, and she struggled with the decision. Thomas left it entirely up to her, promising his full support whatever she chose. In the end, Felicity decided to testify. Standing before a room full of officials and observers, many of whom still judged her for her past, she spoke clearly and honestly about the exploitative practices that trapped desperate women, about the lack of legal protections and alternatives, about the need for reform. Her testimony was powerful precisely because she had lived it, and her current respectability lent weight to her words. The regulations passed, providing better protections for women working in such establishments, and making practices like Brennan's illegal contracts punishable by significant fines and imprisonment. Felicity received letters from women across the territory thanking her for her courage, and while the testimony reopened old wounds and invited renewed gossip, she felt a deep satisfaction in knowing she had helped prevent others from experiencing what she had endured. Through it all, Thomas remained her rock, her partner, her greatest supporter. Their love deepened with each passing year, weathering difficulties and celebrating triumphs together. They taught their children the values that had guided their own lives: integrity, compassion, hard work, and the fundamental belief that every person deserved to be judged by their character rather than their circumstances. Samuel grew into a fine young man who attended university in Denver, studying law with the intention of fighting for justice for those who could not fight for themselves. Grace became a teacher like her mother, eventually taking over as principal of the Veta school when Felicity decided to step back from administration. Thomas Jr. took to ranching with natural skill and eventually expanded the family operation, while Catherine developed a talent for writing and began publishing stories in magazines back east. In 1900, as the new century dawned, Thomas and Felicity stood together at the window of their home, watching their grown children and grandchildren gather for a family dinner. Samuel had brought his wife and 2 sons. Grace arrived with her husband and newborn daughter. Thomas Jr. and his fiancée were there, making plans for their upcoming wedding, and Catherine, home from her travels, entertained everyone with stories of the places she had seen and the people she had met. "We did well," Thomas said softly, taking Felicity's hand in his. "Look at what we built. Not just the ranch or the schools, but this family, these good people we raised." Felicity squeezed his hand, love swelling in her chest. They were both graying now, with lines on their faces that spoke of years lived fully. But Thomas's eyes still held the same warmth they had that day in the saloon, and her heart still quickened when he smiled at her. "We did it together," she replied. "Every step of the way. You saw past what I was to what I could become. You loved me when I could not love myself. You taught me that the past does not define the future." "You taught me what real courage looks like," Thomas countered. "What it means to survive impossible circumstances and come out stronger. You taught me about grace and resilience and the power of second chances." Their youngest grandson, Samuel's boy, ran up to them, pulling on Felicity's skirt. "Grandma, tell us the story. The one about how you and Grandpa met." Felicity looked at Thomas, and they shared a smile full of memory and meaning. Over the years, they had developed a version of their meeting that was true but edited for young ears, focusing on kindness and courage rather than the harsher realities. "Well," Felicity began, settling into a chair as children gathered around. "It was a hot summer day in 1878, and I was working in town when the bravest, handsomest cowboy I had ever seen walked through the door." Thomas laughed and added his own embellishments, and their children and grandchildren listened with rapt attention to the story they had heard before but never tired of hearing. It was their family's origin story, the foundation upon which everything else had been built. As the evening wore on, and the family gathered around the dinner table, abundant with food and filled with laughter, Felicity paused to savor the moment. So much had changed since that day in the Golden Spur when a dusty cowboy had asked for information, and she had taken a chance on kindness. So much growth, so much healing, so much life lived. She had wanted desperately to change her life, to escape the trap she had fallen into, to become something more than the circumstances that had defined her. And she had done it, not alone but with Thomas at her side, believing in her, fighting for her, loving her unconditionally. Thomas caught her eye across the table and raised his glass slightly in a private toast. She raised hers in return, a gesture only they understood, acknowledging the journey they had traveled together and the love that had sustained them through everything. That night, after the family had departed and the house was quiet, Thomas and Felicity lay in bed together, comfortable in the familiar contours of each other's presence. "Felicity Dalton," Thomas said into the darkness, "I want you to know that marrying you was the best decision I ever made. Every day with you has been a gift." "Thomas Dalton," Felicity replied, her voice thick with emotion, "you saved my life, not just by getting me out of the saloon, but by showing me I was worth saving, by teaching me that the past does not define our future, by loving me exactly as I am. The past does not define our future, Thomas repeated softly. I believed that then, and I believe it now. We proved it, did we not? We took two broken people and built something whole and beautiful. We did, Felicity agreed. And I would do it all again. Every difficult moment, every struggle, because it led me to you and to this life we created together. They fell asleep as they had for over 20 years, wrapped in each other's arms, secure in a love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger for it. The years continued their steady march. Thomas and Felicity grew old together, their love a constant in a changing world. The ranch passed to Thomas Jr., who ran it with the same integrity his father had modeled. The school system Felicity had helped build continued to expand and improve, educating generations of children. Samuel became a prominent lawyer known for taking cases others would not touch, defending the defenseless, just as his mother had once needed defending. Grace raised her own children with the same values of compassion and fairness she had learned. And Catherine's writing brought the stories of the West, including carefully fictionalized versions of her mother's journey, to readers across the country. In 1910, on a spring morning much like the one when they had first married, Thomas and Felicity sat together on their porch, old hands clasped, watching the sun rise over the mountains they had called home for over 3 decades. Thomas's health had been failing, and they both knew their time together was drawing to a close, but there was peace in that knowledge rather than fear. "I love you," Thomas said simply. "I have loved you from the moment I saw you, and I will love you beyond the end of my days." "And I love you," Felicity replied, tears sliding down her weathered cheeks. "You were my salvation, my partner, my heart. Everything good in my life came from loving you." Thomas passed away quietly 2 weeks later, surrounded by his family, with Felicity holding his hand until the very end. The grief was profound, but so was the gratitude. They had been given 32 years together, years filled with more love and joy than many people experienced in a lifetime. Felicity lived for 6 more years, spending her remaining time with her children and grandchildren, continuing to advocate for education and women's rights, and writing her memoirs at Catherine's urging. When she died peacefully in her sleep in 1916, she was mourned by hundreds of people whose lives she had touched through her teaching, her advocacy, and her example. At her funeral, Samuel read from his mother's memoirs, passages she had written about meeting Thomas and building their life together. He read her words about overcoming shame, about finding love in unexpected places, about the transformative power of someone believing in you when you could not believe in yourself. He read her final passage, written just weeks before her death. "I want anyone reading this who feels trapped by their circumstances, defined by their past, or hopeless about their future to know this. Change is possible. Love is possible. Redemption is possible. I was a desperate young woman working in a saloon, scorned by society and seeing no path forward. Then I met a man who looked past my circumstances and saw my worth. Together, we built a life beyond anything I had dared to dream. Your past does not define your future. Your mistakes do not determine your worth. And with love, courage, and determination, you can become anything you choose to be. This I know because I lived it." The church was silent as Samuel finished reading, tears streaming down his face. Then Grace began to sing a hymn their mother had loved, and others joined in, their voices rising in celebration of a life well lived, a love that had transformed 2 people and blessed everyone around them. Thomas and Felicity were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their ranch, their headstones simple but meaningful. Thomas Dalton, 1853, 1910, Beloved husband, father, and friend, he believed the best in everyone. Felicity Morgan Dalton, 1855. 1916. Beloved wife, mother, and teacher, she proved the past does not define the future. Their story became legend in Veta, told and retold through the generations. The struggling saloon girl and the cowboy who loved her, who together built a ranch, raised a family, and helped shape a community. It was a story of redemption and second chances, of love conquering judgment, of two people refusing to let circumstances define their destiny. The Dalton Ranch remained in the family for generations, a testament to what Thomas and Felicity had built. The school system Felicity founded continued to educate children, expanding and modernizing but never losing sight of her core principle that every child deserved opportunity, regardless of their background. And in quiet moments, when family gathered to remember and celebrate their heritage, someone would always tell the story of how it all began, in a dusty saloon in 1878, when a cowboy named Thomas saw past the surface to the remarkable woman beneath, and a saloon girl named Felicity found the courage to hope for more. Their love story became part of the fabric of the community, a reminder that people are always more than their worst moments, that the future is not predetermined by the past, and that with love, courage, and unwavering belief in each other, two people can overcome any obstacle and build something beautiful that lasts long after they are gone. Thomas and Felicity had proven it, lived it, and left it as a legacy for all who came after, a testament to the transformative power of love and the endless possibilities that exist when someone believes in you and you dare to believe in yourself.